FCC feel that democracy is all about protecting the rights of the ordinary citizen. Unregulated radio would result in programming of the lowest common denominator, the rule of the mob. This is vandalism, not free expression.
Is in fact a national urban epidemic. Spreads like some mysterious magic marker pen spray paint fungus.
Now it seems that almost every inch of every public wall is covered with names in an obscure kind of print.
It is vandalism.
This is 89.3 WMH Amherst College Radio. You are listening to Uncultured.
Or somebody's private property without permission, and nobody has a right to do that.
It's only vandalism if you get arrested, but if you get away with it, then it's clearly art.
It has left a lasting impression on our culture. They were outlaws with spray paint as their weapon of choice.
We've ever seen an important movement contributed by teenagers in our American culture.
I had a friend who wanted to know what your view is on parents and authority, and when a child no longer is under the household authority.
Well, that's a great question, but you know, I'm speaking now with a grandfather's heart, and I'm telling you that we never get out from under authority.
Hello, and welcome back to Uncultured, our first show of this show cycle. My name is Chimaway, and
my name is Rojas.
Here in the studio with me, we're very excited today to bring you guys some new music that hopefully maybe you're familiar with, but hopefully you aren't, because I think the goal of this show, the purpose of this show, is to kind of look at what it means to be cultured, what it means to be uncultured, and kind of deconstruct the culture that we live through on a daily basis. Kind of give people a new perspective that they wouldn't hear possibly on the commercial radio. And I think that's one of the, why we're here is because we like the beauty of community radio, of student radio, and of radio that brings up new feelings, new ideas, and new emotions to our listeners. So with that spirit, we have a selection of music today that will hopefully bring some interesting ideas up about music and what that means to everyone. So thank you for tuning in. Once again, this is Uncultured. Do you have anything to add, Rojas?
No, that was it. Thank you, Chimaway, for putting up this playlist. And yeah, it's good to be back on air. Hello and welcome back. You are listening to WMH 89.3 FM Amherst College Radio. The songs you were just listening to in chronological order were Resist Control and Well Fed, and a word that the Amherst College Board of Trustees would not allow me to read on air. Both songs are by Born Against. And that was followed by Don't Need It, Attitude, The Regulator, all by Bad Brains. So Chimaway, do you want to talk a little bit about Bad Brains?
Thanks for that introduction, Rojas. One of the reasons I picked Bad Brains is because it's one of the bands that gets a lot of people really interested in faster music, into punk, into hardcore punk, and really what was going on in the 80s and that decade of beautiful, not beautiful music.
Yeah, I think that was one of the big ideas we were both talking about for today's show, is what does it mean for music to come from a culture or a scene that doesn't take beauty as a value it's trying to achieve, or takes like aggression or abrasiveness or tension.
I think that's an interesting question. It's a difficult one because when you're talking about beauty, you're talking about these different things. What is that, you know? I think that punk in and of itself is a reaction to beauty, but it also has its own beauty, you know? A beauty in being close to your own art, beauty in being identifying closely with your own art and creating something out of a community instead of consuming it kind of passively, just being part of this process of the synergy between people, between performances and audiences, or performers and audiences, and having that power to make what you feel is beautiful. And I kind of in a reaction, or as a I guess a product of having all of a sudden this radical freedom to create, the beauty's different. You know, that's how I've seen it. And it has a lot to do with energy. It's very aggressive, you know, and that, you know, it may be different symptoms of the culture we live in, that aggression is a reaction to the way we live. Perhaps necessary, perhaps not, but it's also energy. And one of the things that Bad Brains has a lot of is energy. But at the same time, and why Bad Brains is a lot of the first punk bands for a lot of different people, is that they also have these beautiful reggae breaks to calm your ears, in the, you know, in the on their albums, and you know, they're really great musicians. You know, they start and stop really cleanly. They have a lot of interesting songs and tempo changes, but at the same time, they're lifting that level of energy, the energy of creating something that really means strongly to them, and that was what it meant to be close to your art at the time. So I hope that's my experience. I'm sure everyone has totally different experiences with punk music, but that's my take right now.
Yeah, I'm definitely curious on your experience specifically as someone who participated in like a do-it-yourself scene, as you were describing, like participated in this like as you called it, like this radical moment of autonomy, and like you can create what you want, you and your friends, and yeah, what came out from you in those moments seemed to also be this similar, like
that's what it was about.
And speed.
That's what it was about, was having autonomy over your own creative potential. I also want to say hi to Ian, who's in the studio right now. Thanks for joining us.
Hi.
Yeah, it was. So a feeling that's hard to describe, really, and it's something that's really beautiful. That basically you get to be a part of your own expression, and whether like one of the things that really got me excited about punk music was that one, I could be a part of it right now. There was no expensive equipment. You had to, well, there was a little, you know, but you could buy cheap equipment. You could go and play shows to 10, 20, 50, 100 people, and you knew most of the people there. You know, it was very comfortable. But at the same time, the audience would mainly be other musicians that would either be traveling in or local musicians, so that the audience and the musician or the performance group were the same thing, and that energy could flow really freely back and forth, or there wasn't a barrier in front of the stage, or there wasn't even a stage at all a lot of times. And so that was something that I loved. you could go and up to the musicians after as they were loading up their equipment because no one else was doing it for them and say, hey, thank you for playing, I really liked your music. And you could say, why is it the music so fast and all that? But I think it's honestly just, like I said, it's a reaction to what we're told to consume and all that. But also it's a reaction to all of a sudden having the freedom, and just the feeling of that is really exhilarating. And I think when you're given that medium, punk music or hardcore punk or whatever you want to call it, it is liberating. It's a great feeling, and that energy I think comes from that to an extent. Though of course I'm sure there's all kinds of music that aren't as fast that you could have the same feeling of creativity as well.
Yeah, that's I think for me, my introduction to bands that were like operating on a lot of those same values on autonomy, again, like just a do-it-yourself scene under the radar, not signing to a major label, selling your own stuff, small shows, was through bands like Beat Happening, which I don't know if you've ever heard, but they play. I would definitely still call it punk, but essentially they're playing pop songs, about going to the beach with your friends and like baking pies, but what was like radical about them to me was, they were like, their drums were like pots and pans. Their songs have like 3 notes that are repeated over and over. Their melodies are like something a child would hum. And so, yeah, it was a lot of the same things you're describing of that, like I could do this. Like this music means a lot to me. There was like a whole, community and a culture that grew from that band they were playing in Washington back in the 80s. And just the feeling of wanting to do that and knowing that, there's all these financial, institutional reasons why maybe you can't make music. I got to sign to a label, like I got to get big, I got to go get this fancy equipment. And then for this band to just like in this like beautiful minimalist way say like, no, you just have to like get on stage and make culture happen. I think that like gets to the core of what it might mean to be uncultured.
Very well put. It's like this moment of the deconstruction of culture that is a creation, and it has its own aesthetic. It could be punk, it could be reggae, it could be hip hop, it could be all these different genres that are very radical in all their different ways. But there's always this deconstruction, of the aesthetic that people come to take for granted. But I mean, it's not necessarily should be taken for granted. Yeah. Or you can.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to listen to a bunch of those different like do-it-yourself local small scenes and like find what are the kind of common features, because it seems a lot of it is cheaply made, not the best equipment, usually pretty like simple a lot of the times, but it can also like and some of the stuff you're playing like is pretty like intense musicianship. But yeah, I'd just be curious to what sort of traits might like be a cohesive like thing among.
I think that one of the traits that might be cohesive may be that it is challenging in some way. And I was going to a show with this band called the Avocado Commissioners, who used to play around Santa Barbara for a little bit. I think they're not together anymore, and they only played a couple of shows, but they were something else to see. And one of my friends was like, "Dang, I don't like this music. It's too challenging for me." And I was like,
"You're feeling it."
I was feeling it, yeah. And I said, "Wow, it's challenging." That's exactly why I started playing punk music. Why I'm into this do-it-yourself music, because it's challenging at first because you're given the opportunity to, I guess, go beyond what you thought music was, or go beyond the conventions, and it challenges you to kind of meet the musicians like that.
You can't be passive with it, is what challenging means.
Yeah, at the same time, sometimes it's just challenging to listen to.
You just want to turn it off. So I'm going to read a quick PSA, and then I'm going to step outside and go and find our special guest for tonight. But this Friday, February the 9th, at the First Church in Amherst, which if you go to Amherst College is right across the streets on the way to Marsh, they're holding a potluck from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. For Lucio Perez, who's immigrant from Guatemala who's been in sanctuary there since October. You can sign up. There's a Facebook event. If you just type in, what's it called? Potluck with Lucio, ! It's hosted by the Pioneer Valley Workers Center. You can find it, and in the description, there's a Google Docs that you can sign up and, say what you're going to bring to this potluck. But yeah, just show up, be part of community, and enjoy what I'm assuming is going to be some delicious food. So yeah, with that, I'm going to step out. I don't know if you want to play some songs or keep riffing.
I guess I'll play a couple songs next, for a few minutes, but before I wanted to play them, I just wanted to say that this band ANS, which is up there, their initials come from the Vans logo, but that's a different story. But this band was one of the first bands I saw in Santa Barbara, and when they came on stage, they were talking about what it means to play hardcore punk, and that you don't get paid very much, you just get enough to go to the next gig. But at the same time, they were living exactly how they wanted to live, and it was inspiring for me to put your creativity and your agency in your own hands and just do what you want to do. So this is ANS off their couple songs off the compilation Let Them Eat Wood.
Back inside. Just me, myself, my enemy, my closest friend. 2 eyes in the mirror, 4 eyes staring cold. Feeling brown. Cloud out. Number one place in mind.
Hello and welcome back. You're listening to WMH 89.3 FM Amherst College Radio. This is Uncultured. You were just listening to Somewhere Inside by ANS. And now joining us live in the studio, fresh off a flight from Brazil, is the Spranz. The Spranz, how have you been?
I'm good. How have you been?
We've been good. We've been so far just talking about autonomous cultures creating their own music. Chimaway was telling us about how inspired he was as a youth by hardcore scenes. And we're led to believe you've recently been in Brazil, been seeing some graffiti, and Brazilian graffiti apparently is different than U.S. graffiti.
Yeah, I guess I could talk. Wait, but before that, what music was Chimaway just playing? I didn't get a chance to hear him introduce the song.
Oh, that last song was Somewhere Inside by ANS.
Oh, cool. Do you say ANS or is it ONS? Is it wrong if I say ONS?
I don't know about wrong, but it definitely it is a sequence of 3 letters that is an acronym.
Okay, cool. I'll have to listen to more of their stuff. Anyway, yeah. Do you hear like an annoying buzzing sound?
No, you sound good.
Okay, cool. It's just me then. Yeah. So when I first got here, there was a lot of graffiti everywhere, and Paula actually asked me. She noticed it. She was more like attuned to this than I was. She was like, that looks really unique. It has like a very distinct style. Like, I don't know. Do you feel that way too? I was like, dude, that's just tags. Like, that's just tagging. That's what it's called. And she was like, I don't know, is it? I was like, yeah, it's just tagging, Paula. Duh. And I made her feel all bad. I didn't make her feel bad. I'm sure she didn't feel bad, but but then after doing a little research, I learned that in Brazil there's a distinction between graffiti and what this specific thing that we were observing is called, and it's called pichação, which comes from this word piche, which means tar in Portuguese. And pichação, kind of like, if you don't know what it is, it'll just look like tagging, but it is a kind of specific kind of look, I would say, in that it almost looks like hieroglyphs. I don't even know how to describe it. I can never read them, to be honest. So I wouldn't have even known that they were like names, right? They can be. People seem to think that that they're just like people's, like, they often are, but they're not always, that they're just like gang's name, or I don't know, pichador's like name, but like based on my reading, they're also oftentimes like just words. So yeah, it'll be the pichador's name, but it's also like the name he chose is very specific, like Doomsday, or I don't know, like Misery, or something kind of like dark. Because I guess anyway, I feel like I'm talking a lot, but when you think of tags, do you consider like tags graffiti?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's all in the same,
like,
I don't know,
sphere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
same sphere. Yeah.
So that's, I guess, the thing that tripped me up so much, is that people don't consider this type of, I don't have a word for it, but whether it's art or not is like up for debate, but whether this art is considered graffiti. And so there's like legal distinctions too. Like graffiti is legal here, but pichação is not, which is strange to me.
That is interesting.
Yeah, and like, how do you make that distinction exactly, right? Like, how do you, so when I had to give a presentation about this is how I started to like learn so much about it. And my teacher, like, I finished my presentation and she was like, I don't think this is art. I think it's vandalism. And I feel like that's just like the general sentiment here, which is why like this became a law in the first place, you know, like how like it was like this weird distinction that I'm not able to grasp, of someone who's like comes from a place where like tagging is graffiti, you know, or is considered graffitiing, and like I guess we consider murals in like a different kind of sphere of art, of like street art. But I don't know, I was trying to explain to her poorly in my poor Portuguese that you have to understand pichação within like the context of like I guess angered youth, really kind of reacting in a very urban environment, and like that urban environment I don't think I know of any urban environment that's like super. I mean, I haven't seen that. I guess if I maybe travel to like Nordic countries or whatever, maybe. But like urban environments kind of to me mean like inequality in a lot of ways. So they're a reaction to that. I like watched one really cool video on this where they put it really nicely. They're like the people who like do pichasao, like they would rather be hated because they are like my teacher in my class was like they're vandals, like like they're criminals, like they deserve to be fined and put in jail for doing that. They would rather be hated than ignored. Is like the sentiment they have when they're like doing this type of art. I consider it art. I don't know. So yeah, it's a little community in and of itself. Like people, like give each other's autographs and like they know each other, and it's almost like it's a very dangerous activity here. Like they do it in like tagging, right? Like super risky spots. And people have died like trying to do this. So I don't know.
That's
kind
really
of an
interesting.
insane
Yeah.
concept, pichasao.
It's especially interesting because it almost seems like, from my very limited understanding of this whole concept, but it almost seems like that once graffiti was normalized, it was accepted as art. It was accepted as part of the culture. There needed to be created another category in order for this unculture to exist. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's interesting. But to like, I guess I think I understand what you're saying, but I think this subculture always existed. And the culture was always like the graffiti was always like a growing, like legalization only it didn't really change the movement of like street art in any way, right? If anything, I think it made the distinction like more rigid. Whereas before, like a lot of, I'm trying to defend. Okay, so I think graffiti as a movement was growing and was becoming part of the popular culture like well before any law said it was, right? Said it was like, okay, now we accept you into our culture. And if anything, it was the vice versa. It was like because it was becoming part of like accepted culture that this law passed. And pichasao has existed. That's a really hard sound for me to make, to be honest. I'm not getting it right. But pichasao was around since like the 80s. So like it's been one of the first like mentions of it is during the dictatorship here. So it's been around for a while. What else did I want to say about
what
this
exactly is
between
the
culture
difference
and subculture?
between?
And I think
okay.
it's weird that they like try to define it so rigidly because like they feed off of each other in a way. For instance, like a lot of really famous like graffiti, well-known like Brazilian graffiti artists started off as like pichadores. So it's like I don't know, it's strange. I find it almost like silly to try to criminalize this thing that's like the way most people who get into street art start, you know? It's like saying like, sketching is not real art, but doing oil painting is. I don't know. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, that's my question was where is the line? What is the difference between pichasao and graffiti in this context? Besides, clearly there's a legal line. But before there was a legal line, what was it?
It's like there is like stylistic differences. Like one is like graffiti tends to be more like images and pichasao is like words. But even then it's like,
That's
what is
interesting.
the word? Like I said, is an actual like expression. Like people think it's ugly and vandalism because they seem to interpret it as just like putting his name on, like a store building. But I mean, like, what if it wasn't a name, but it's like something like the word is darkness, and that's like a self-expression of like the situation, you know, that they feel in this very like unequal urban setting, like I said before. So I don't know where the line is drawn, and I would consider that art, right? If it's like any form of self-expression, even if it's an egotistical one too, you know, like even if it's like I'm gonna put my name on everything, like in a way that's kind of.
But you may be pointing to an inadequacy with the term art then, too.
Yeah, it's
It
like
could go
doesn't
both
really
ways.
capture a lot. Like what is even art, but up for interpretation, I guess.
Yeah, I'm kind of relating it almost to some of the stuff Chimaway was talking about earlier of the hardcore scenes, because a lot of them have very confrontational. Cops and hardcore scenes don't get along. I'll put it that way. Like there's tons of fights.
Right.
And
Hardcore music in and of itself is kind of seen as like trash, right?
and like not art.
Like it
Some would say, yeah.
Not real music, right?
Especially.
Even though it does take a lot of skill and like thought to create.
Chimaway's shaking his head.
No, I was actually. Never mind. It can, yeah, it can, and the thing is that even more so in the 80s when Bad Brains and Minor Threat and these other bands were coming out, it was much more violent and it was much more unaccepted. It was not cool to be a punk, whereas a lot of people nowadays may find it more cool and it's trendy and all these different things. But before that, it really wasn't. And I think that's what I was getting the feeling for, is when you said it's better to be hated than ignored. Yeah, I feel like that was a sentiment for a lot of these punk bands and hardcore punk bands in the 80s, before anyone thought it was any worthwhile music, you know. And there was just these beginnings of a punk scene and genre, all that, even in the 70s, you know, and the origins of all that. But in the 80s is when it gets really fast, which I like.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Fisha Sao is that it actually like kind of kicked off in the 80s too. And like what inspired it here was like covers, like album covers of bands like Metallica, of bands like Iron Maiden, of bands, I don't know, like bands that were kind of well known in the United States and were traveling overseas. So it's kind of funny how like these American and British like rock and sometimes punk bands were like influencing this style like of graffiti, for lack of a better word in English, in Brazil in like that decade. So
yeah, I'm almost in my head thinking of it now as this like common trend of, like, I would even say in some the way you're describing it as a reaction to inequality, almost like this trend of political resistance too, of rather being hated than ignored, and like something even as old as this like Mexican myth of like the La Llorona, which is like a person who is an Indian woman who is like robbed of all power, and so her only like last defense of, you know, fighting back against something was to just cry, and almost a lot of this art that is considered not art or vandalism or X, Y, and Z is kind of the same thing, of people in a position where like this is all that's left for them, and they're creating their own little form of self-expression.
Right. And I want to, like, the interesting thing about Fisha Sao too is that they don't want to be legitimized, right? They don't want to be, it's not like the solution to Fisha Sao is to make it legal. I'm not like suggesting that at all, and I don't think most pichadores would like want they don't want to aspire to be graffiti. In fact, they like look down on graffiti for being like a sellout, or like you're trying to like beautify the town for who? For like tourists, like to make them like more happy coming to like sorry, beep, this like kind of really messed up place, you know, that is Brazil. Politically in the 80s continues to be really politically messed up. You know, so it's a kind of like an outlash against that. So I think that people who criticize it without like taking into account like this, like the social context it like arose in and continues to exist in, kind of have like a nearsighted view, and don't really like appreciate it for what it is, right? I don't know.
What you reminded me of is when you said that they don't want it to be legalized. You know, don't want it to be legitimate, to have legitimacy. It's a profound statement right there. Because what it is really they're contesting the legitimacy of the state, right? And to mediate their forms of expression, and whether it's political, whether it's artistic, and that's that's a radical thing, you know.
No, definitely. I think it's funny that like, because it is, there was like one, I think I read about it, this case where I don't know who specifically, but some like pichador work got put in a gallery. Some photographer, I think it was, took pictures of all this art, put it in a gallery, and the gallery was vandalized. It was like just some dude like just put an X like on all the photographs, just like crossing it out, because it was like this shouldn't be in a gallery. This shouldn't exist in this space for someone to kind of just like I don't know what to say. Kind of just, I don't know. It's uncultured in a nutshell, right? Being like, no, this shouldn't exist here. It's not for you. For like this, who's gonna go into that gallery? Not like the people making the art, not the people like spending time around that. I don't know. I thought that was a really cool thing.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I think what's really amazing about it and inspiring is that in these different situations where you have a reaction to a culture, you know, that is that you feel is shoving you away or blocking you out or making you powerless, and these different forms of violence, you might categorize different kinds of violence besides physical, but also these physical manifestations of violence by the state, that there's this violent reaction where these scenes, whether it's artistic scenes, whether it's musical scenes, have violence in their expression in different ways. But at the same time, that opens up doors for different politics, for ways of reimagining things or imagining new things, or, you know, ways of seeing how you can act to create spaces or places where you can put your own creative autonomy forward, you know?
It's physically claiming like space. You're right. Like it's physically being like, this is now, even if it is like just some dude spray painting Billy on a wall. Hey, that's like Billy's wall now. Like it can be all of our walls. Like, you know, it's like our wall, or it has the potential to be. You know.
There's definitely a politics around it, even though a lot of times, it's non-political, maybe in its immediate intention, and there's all different sorts of political expression that comes from graffiti or comes from punk music, but at the same time, I think there is a underlying potential there for some really amazing and creative to come out of it.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. Another thing from this like video I was watching, there's a movie on like Vimeo if any person listening is interested.
Do you have a title?
Pisha Sao. Just Pisha Sao on Vimeo.
How do you spell that?
P-I-C with a little, sorry, P-I-X. Sorry, P-I-X-A-C with a little doobly-doo underneath it.
Accessibility.
And then an A with a doobly-doo on top of it, and then an O.
Great.
I'll send it to Rojas in a text after this. If
yeah,
he wants to put it on I'll comment it on I'll comment it on the WAM little link.
But for our listeners, yeah, it's very interesting. It'd be good to see what the stylistic differences between the two genres of graffiti in Brazil.
Yeah, but I was interested in, what was I saying before I got...
You were gonna talk about a point that the documentary.
Oh, this guy, what he mentioned is like, if you ask a pichador why he's doing what he's doing, like he's not gonna be able to tell you. Like they won't. They'll just say like that's kind of just what I feel like I need to do, right? And I feel like that, I don't know, that's telling in and of itself, is that this person who may not have like I don't know, the best political experience or like the best education or whatever, feels inclined to do something, right? Feels inclined to like even like not necessarily say anything, but like at least do something, which I think is very interesting.
Yeah, Chimaway was talking earlier about going to these hardcore shows and being like, oh wait, I can do this too, and how a lot of this music, again, is maybe not empowering to form a political union or form a voting bloc or et cetera.
Join a party.
But it's empowering in the sense of like you can, at the minimum, create your own culture. At the most, create a community, which again, as we've talked about, could have all sorts of potentials for imagining a different sort of way of relating to people, a different sort of city that doesn't have inequality, or that at least is paying attention to its inequality.
That's a beautiful way to say it.
I think that's critical. Like the moment the society begins to not just see as like vandalism and not just see this as I don't know, something like ugly in the way of their like nice clean life, then it's the moment that change becomes possible, right? Like why do we have this ugly, like if you want to call it ugly, like hieroglyphs all over the city? Like why? Why is that a reaction in the first place? So many people.
We're having a chirological moment in time on the studio.
The studio clock just broke. And now it's just telling us it's 02. Chimaway's making some jokes about our class we're taking on time.
Now you know about Pichação and the distinction between it and graffiti in Brazil. I think it's probably one of the only places where like this is a cultural like distinction and a legal one.
Wow, that's incredible, and it worked really well with our theme for today. It's great with what we were talking about. So thank you.
Thank you guys. Have a good first show and good semester. Miss y'all.
Yeah, thanks for flying down to meet us here.
No problem.
Enjoy your flight back.
Thanks. Bye.
Do you have a song you want to hear before you step out the studio?
Before we continue our auditory vandalism.
Do you remember the song I sent you, Rojas?
I do. Yeah, I could figure out how to.
The train.
Yeah, we might have to play another song while I pull it up, but yeah, I got it.
Okay, I'll play a couple more songs.
That song is called "The Train." It's by this like hip hop artist, like rapper who's from Brazil, and I found the song by watching this movie I mentioned. So if you like the song, that means you like the soundtrack of this movie. So you should give it a look. The link's on the radio.com.
WAMHradio.com.
Yeah, the link's posted up there. Peace out, y'all. Have a good show. Have a good semester.
Thanks, homie.
Talk to you soon. Okay, so I'm going to put on some more ANS. This is a song called Skeleton Man while we're going to queue up the request from the spranz. Here you go.
That was perfect.
Back inside. Just me, myself, my enemy, my closest friend. 2 eyes in the mirror, 4 eyes staring cold. Feel the ground. No one plays the ground. não para em pé. Yeah, yeah.
Realidade é muito triste, mas é no subúrbio surge esse mundo submundo que persiste o crime. Pegar o trem é arriscado, trabalhador não tem escolha, então enfrenta aquele trem lotado. Não se sabe quem é assim, pode ser ladrão ou não. Tudo bem se for pra mim, se for polícia fica esperto Zé, pois a lei dá cobertura pra ele te socar se quiser. O cheiro é mal de ponta a ponta, mas assim mesmo normalmente o que predomina é a maconha. E aos milhares de todos os tipos, de manhã na neurose, como que pode ter um dia lindo? Portas abertas mesmo correndo, lotado até o teto sempre está, meu irmão vai vendo. Não dá pra aguentar assim, é o trem que é assim. Já estive, eu sei, já estive. Muita atenção, essa é verdade. Subúrbio pra morrer, assim vou dizer, é mole. Todos os dias mesma gente, é sempre andando, viajando, surfando, mais a mais não teme. Vários malucos, movimento quente, vários moleques pra vender. Vem comprar, é aqui que vende. Quem diz que é surfista então fica de pé, bota uma fé, assim que é. Se cair vai pro saco. Me lembra de um irmão troço chato, subia, descia, por sobre o trem sorria. Vinha da Barra Funda há 2 anos todo dia. Em cima do trem com os manos, surfistas, assim chamados são popularmente. Se levantou e encostou naquele fio, tomou um choque, mas tão forte que nem sentiu, foi as nuvens. Tá com Deus, mano, Biro sabe. Subúrbio pra morrer, assim vou dizer, é mole.
Subúrbio para morrer, vou dizer.
É mole.
E agora cê liga, você pode crer. Todo cuidado não basta, porque
o trem é assim que é.
E eu peço Oxalá então, sempre vai nos guardar, dai-nos forças pra lutar. Sei que vai precisar. No trem, meu bom, é assim, é o que é. Então centenas vão sentados e milhares vão em pé. Em todas as estações, ali preste atenção nos PFs. O trem para o povo entra e sai. É depois disso o trem já se vai. Mas o que é isso? Esquisito. E várias vezes assisti trabalhador na porta tomando borrachadas, marmitas amassadas, fardas. Isso é lei, vejam vocês, são cães, só querem humilhar toda vez. Aconteceu o ano passado em Perus, um maluco estava na paz, sem dever, caminhava na linha assim, a uns 100 metros dessa estação. Preste atenção, repressão segundo testemunhas dali. Ouvi, foi na cara dura, assassinato, mas não foi divulgado. E ninguém está, não está. Ninguém viu as mortes na estrada de ferro, Santo João de aí. E ninguém tá nem aí. Osasco, Itapevi, do Brasa Mogi, o Tamanduá, Teio, Piquei. É o fim, na real é assim.
Subúrbio pra morrer, vou dizer, é mole.
No trem é assim que é.
O bicho pega.
Hello, you are listening to WMH 89.3 FM Amherst College Radio. You were just listening to RZO by Omen. Beautiful suggestion by the Spranz. Thank you so much for joining us in the studio. We're going to play one song by Beat Happening, this band I was talking about earlier. Super minimalist, inspiring rock music. And then we're going to go right back to Chimaway's hardcore. And then we're going to be talking about Puerto Rico in a moment. Yeah.
Still I'm all alone. You've got me caught. Let go my heart. chest has been upset because I'm the one. I got a crush on you, got a crush on you. You won't let me through. I got a crush on you, I got a crush on you, got a crush on you, got a crush on you, I got a crush on you. I can't relax, old Mr. Scratches on my back, made a devil's pack, trading old black cat for a witch's brew. Satan, seven sins, and you, I got a crush on you, I got a crush on you. You won't let me through, I got a crush on you, got a crush on you, making me so blue. I got a crush on you, what am I to do? Got a crush on you.
Hello, hello, and welcome back to Uncultured. You're listening to WAMH 89.3 FM, Amherst College Radio, broadcasting live from the Amherst College campus. This is Uncultured. My name is Chimaway Lopez. I'm here with Rojas and our special guest. Would you like to introduce yourself today?
Hi everyone, my name is Gabi Smith-Rosario. I am a senior who just completed my thesis, and after some of Chimaway's awesome music, we will be listening to some of the music that inspired me.
Thanks for joining us. I'm excited for this change in tempo as well as theme, but your thesis was pretty incredible, so I'm really excited and honored to have you in the studio today.
Thank you so much.
So Gabby, do you want to tell us a little bit about the song we're listening to?
So this is Asturias by Isaac Albeniz. He was a Spanish composer in the 19th century, and most famous for his guitar music, which, if you went to my thesis, there wasn't a ton of guitar music, but it's really influential from Spain into other Latin American countries, as is evident through the music.
Yeah, so a lot of your thesis was about exploring Puerto Rico, Puerto Rican identity. Could you just talk a little about the inspiration for that, both musically and also just in your personal life? And
for our listeners, give us a background about what it was for everyone who didn't have the pleasure to be able to attend your thesis.
Yeah.
Was it yesterday?
It was yesterday. It was yesterday at 7 p.m. So the idea behind my thesis was to explore. Originally, I had the idea of doing Latinx identity in music, and then of course I realized that was way too broad, and there's too much diversity.
There's a couple different people that identify as Latinx. Yeah.
There's even musically it's so broad, but I think. So I decided to narrow it down to Puerto Rican music, and there's some overlap obviously with like Dominican and Cuban music, but so I decided to explore the three cultural groups that came together to blend into what is like broadly Puerto Rican identity, but I also identify with all three of the groups ethnically. So that would be African, so like West African through the Spanish slave trade, obviously the Spanish, and the Taino people, the native peoples of Puerto Rico. What further propelled me to like explore this was obviously the Hurricane Maria. I had a fundraiser at my concert, and I had a fundraiser at my concert, and we raised, I believe, over $600 for Unidos por Puerto Rico.
Wow.
Yeah. So I decided to explore with different musical aspects, going through the cultural history of Puerto Rico. And so we started with like Taino music. We went into Spanish music, which is kind of along the lines of what you just heard, going into West African drumming, and then into like more modern blended forms of music.
Gotcha. Yeah, there was so many instruments, so many different pieces, and to be honest, it was my first music thesis that I'd ever attended, and yeah, I'd always imagined them as someone going up there with a guitar and like performing a song they wrote or something, but this was like an arrangement. This was an event that you put together. I was just amazed that like a single person could write for so many different instruments, get so many other people involved. Like there was so many very talented musicians out there putting your vision into reality. So yeah, do you want to talk a little about the process? Are you composing everything?
Yeah, so a lot of the music that I used, I wrote all the instrumental and vocal parts. Some of the words that I used were actually from poems by either Puerto Rican or New Rican poets.
New Rican, just for listeners.
New Rican is after like there was a pretty mass migration in like the 50s, 60s of Puerto Ricans to the continental U.S., and one of the biggest hubs was in New York. So there was this kind of booming culture of, Puerto Rican identity, but in New York, so it began to kind of evolve with New York life, and so New Rican is the term that they use for like the kind of different. It's a little bit different than just plain like in the island. So it was a lot of work. I did a lot of before I wrote anything for any of it, I did a lot of ethnomusicology research. So I would listen to a lot of music, a lot of Spanish music, a lot of danzas, a lot of West African music, because I wanted to do it right. I didn't want to do a disservice to any of the musical styles or cultures. And Yeah, so I did write some of the words myself, though. I wrote a protest song, kind of condemning the state of government affairs with regard to Puerto Rico. And I wrote all the words, and I sang it while guitarist Theo Perez played, and it was a lot of work, the two of us, but I think it paid off.
It was. I know of two people who were moved to tears during that part of it. It was a very touching and inspiring moment, for sure. But yeah, there was also a lot of.
There were a lot of instruments. So we had like trumpet, guitar, upright bass, piano,
all
flute,
sorts of drums,
guitar. Oh my gosh, we had congas, we had djembe, we had the.
It was an event, people.
Yoruba talking drum, and we had. What else do we have? We have bongos. We had these hollow, they're technically a Chinese instrument called muyu, but we use them as like a hollow wood drum, which sounds like a Taino instrument. So we did it for the aesthetic quality. We had like claves, we had maracas, we had guidos, we had, you name it. If it was like a non-Western instrument,
on stage.
It was on stage. Yeah.
Is there a song you wanna play next?
I want to play a danza by one of the most famous Puerto Rican composers of the 20th century, Rafael Hernandez. He actually wrote one of the most famous Puerto Rican kind of anthems. So coming up, a danza by Rafael Hernandez and his orchestra.
All right, thank you. Hello and welcome back. You are listening to WMH 89.3 FM Amherst College Radio, and the song you were just listening to was called...
I should know this. It was Jose Maria Rodriguez, or it's Quejas del Alma.
Which translates to Complaints from the Soul, for all you gringos. So yeah, we got a couple more songs queued up. But yeah, how did you feel after you pulled it off?
It didn't register, honestly.
Yeah, how long have you been working on this?
I've been working on it since September, and I worked in the music department. You can work for 2 credits or 1 credit each semester, and I worked for 2, and it was I would have suffered even more so otherwise. Yeah. It was ultimately really worth it, but I had like 20 people to gather around, and I had a choral ensemble. They did an amazing job, but it took a lot of work.
Amen. Yes.
It took so much work.
Yeah, I'm curious, is any of that at that point collaborative, or at this point is it just trying to get them to fulfill your vision?
I'm definitely open to ideas, especially for like improvisational aspects. But there are questions that they asked that wouldn't have even occurred to me. There was someone who speaks Russian, and when they saw the word oho, which is spelled O-J-O-S, ohos, it was O-J-O-S, they pronounced the J like a Y, like in Russian, so they said oyo.
Oh, nope.
Which does not translate to I. But so it got me really thinking about how to really teach people to sing in Spanish who'd never spoken Spanish before.
Because they sounded great, and I always there's in the 40s there was a series of covers of like Frank Sinatra and like that kind of style of singer started singing a lot in Spanish just because Latin music at the time was popular, and it's terrible. They're so accented, it sounds awful. But these singers, whom I know a lot of them, and I know they don't speak Spanish, they sounded fluent. So yeah, I was tripping out.
Oh yeah, I made sure that they rolled their R's,
It was stunning.
tried to get it all working.
And not only Spanish, but correct me if I'm wrong, but also Yoruba
and Taino.
So you had a lot of different languages going on.
I had 3 different languages. Yep. And they pulled it off. They sang in all 3, and they sounded really good.
And why were these languages important to you? Why not just English lyrics?
Why not just English? Because they don't really traditionally speak English in Puerto Rico. But I think a lot of the theses are in English, and I wanted to distinguish, why should we care about Spanish? Why should we care? It's actually a pretty beautiful language. And some of the things, like the poems, don't translate as well into English. So if I had translated the poems into English, which I've done before, I've translated a Spanish poem into English and then, written a piece. But it really captures kind of the beauty of the poems. So Taino is the traditional language. So it was thought to be dead, but it's not. And there's still people in Puerto Rico who do speak it, and pockets throughout the Caribbean. And so I worked on, trying to learn it a little bit. And Yoruba is, the language of the Yoruba people of Nigeria, and that's where my ancestors came from, and that's where a lot of the West African slaves came from, Nigeria. So they either spoke Igbo or Yoruba. And I actually had a Mount Holyoke professor translate English to Yoruba for me, and then it was really cool.
Yeah. Do you think you? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Chimaway.
Oh, it's okay. You can go.
I was just gonna ask about if the process of writing all this music and, as you said, researching it and doing all of this, did it in any way change your understanding of your own identity, your relationship to all the people throughout time that came before you that allowed your life to happen?
Yeah, it really did. It actually helped me, as a Puerto Rican, it was kind of inherent for me to have the Spanish identity. But I hadn't really thought a lot about, the, West African origins or the Taino identity. And so it really helped me kind of reconnect with that aspect of myself. Like I'd always identified, but I never really, acted upon that identity.
Kept it alive in
Kept
yourself.
it alive, yeah. And, I'd never even heard the language like spoken before. And so it kind of like helped me to embrace that. And a lot of Puerto Ricans actually do have native blood. Like, so that's like, I think a really important thing, like for me to kind of hopefully like reinstill in people who identify as Puerto Rican. And especially like West African music. It wasn't something I'd really kind of listened to much before. I had some experience, but it's really foundational for like more modern Puerto Rican music. Like the drumming patterns, when you hear like a salsa son rhythm, it actually comes from West Africa.
Huh.
And I learned that through this process of doing all this research. So yeah, it was a really interesting experience.
This idea of reconnecting to your ancestors is amazing and fascinating and exciting, to have that experience within your own work. And it's just reminding me a lot of the indigenous experience across, the continents, and across the world. Because a lot of languages they're in danger of being lost. They're in danger of, not existing anymore. And people around the world are realizing how important that is. And so for you to be representing all these different languages in your thesis, I think is really important and has a lot of really powerful implications. That's a really a great thing that you did. And one thing I just, that was just coming to mind, thinking back to the different conversations we've had on this show about indigenous language, the power of indigenous language within in different mediums, as well as having Puerto Rican water protectors come on and talk about their indigenous identity, talk about why they're, fighting for their water, for their, clean air. And did you want to comment on that, any more than you have? You've already talked beautifully about it.
Oh, thank you. I think it's really important to, bring up the conversation, not just about music, but about, in the context of music, social issues, especially because I feel like people constantly are forgetting that, Puerto Ricans have still been without, power for months. It's not actively in the news. It's not actively in the media. And I think it's really important to remember that, we shouldn't be considered more important because we're citizens, but we are citizens of the United States at the same time. And, Puerto Ricans throughout history have been like a very resilient people, in the face of colonization, in the face of like bomb threats from the United States, different kinds of oppression. And, I've been in some communication with my family there, and, they're like, it's amazing. They're kind of just dealing with it. They're kind of just continuing on with as normal lives as they can. But that said, I wanted to make it clear how important like this culture is that is, now integrated as part of the United States. Yeah.
Beautiful. So is there the next song you want to play?
Yeah.
Tell us about
So this is a song called, it's a protest song called Ubao Moin, and it's by Roy Brown, and it's from the, I believe it's from the 60s, and it's about but it's written after the fact. It's about the slaughter of the Taínos by the Spanish.
De la leyenda dorada, la corriente arrastra oro, la corriente está ensangrentada. El río mala tu agua, tira la
ensangrentada. El río Cibuco escribe su nombre con letra dorada. La corriente arrastra oro, la corriente está ensangrentada. En donde unió la arboleda su raíz en tierra dorada,
y las ramas chorrean sangre, la arboleda está ensangrentada.
donde dobló la frente y mi bien sea tierra, bien sea agua, bajo el peso de las cadenas entre los hierros de la ergástula. Allí la tierra hiede a sangre, corre el agua ensangrentada. Donde el negro quebró sus hombros, bien sea tierra, bien sea agua, y su cuerpo marcó el carimbo y abrió el látigo su espalda. Allí la tierra hiede a sangre, corre agua ensangrentada. Donde el blanco pobre sufrió los horrores de la peonada, el machete del mayoral, la libreta de jornada. Allí la tierra está maldita, corre el agua envenenada.
A esas manos taínas porque trabajaban, a esas manos negras porque trabajaban, a esas manos blancas porque trabajaban. De entre esas manos nos salió la patria. A las manos que la mina excavara, a las manos que el ganado cuidara, a las manos que el tabaco y que la caña y que el café sembrara. A las manos que los caminos trabajaran, a las manos que las ruedas giraran, a todas las manos de todos los hombres y mujeres que trabajaran. Y gloria a las manos, a todas las manos que hoy trabajan, porque ellas construyen y saldrá de ellas la nueva patria Para ellos y para su patria, alabanza, alabanza.
Hello, hello. You're listening to Uncultured. This is 89.3 WAMH,
It's his first time,
Amherst
guys,
College
sorry.
Radio. I forgot the station ID, but that's okay. So, okay, tell us a little bit about this song, just to remind the listeners.
Yeah, this is Ubal Moim by Roy Brown. It's this is a more orchestrated version. It's originally just guitar and voice duet, and it's a protest song about the slaughter and oppression of the native Taino people by the invading Spanish in Puerto Rico.
Heavy topic.
It is a very heavy topic. This next song we're going to play has a really interesting story. So while I was doing my research for my thesis, I was meeting with a professor who is Yoruba from Nigeria, and I was talking about, music I had heard that I thought had very obvious West African influence, including this song coming up. But so we were talking about this kind of phrase that comes up, awanile. And it comes up in both bomba music, it comes up in kind of a twisted version. So awanile in Yoruba means we are home or we are at home, depending on the tonal inflection that you use. In a salsa song from the 70s, they came up with they transformed it again through language to come up with something that sounded more Spanish. So they came up with aguanile, which is Nile water, Nile River, which is obviously not West Africa and not where most of the slaves were taken from, but it was actually kind of this concept of Africa as like a whole, as a an origin place. And I literally didn't know that when I said agua, I played him this song, and he was like, all I hear is awanila, which is we are home. So it shows kind of the transition between these native languages from different cultures and how they were adapted to something tangible in Spanish and in Puerto Rican culture.
That is a pretty incredible story.
Yeah, I had no idea. We both had our minds blown.
Wow. Well, shall we play the song then?
Yeah, so this is Aguanile by New Rican, so Puerto Rican based in New York, salsero Willie Colon and singer cantante Hector Lavoe. And check out the beginning. It's very, very cool.
traición. Aguanile, aguanile, mai, mai. Aguanile, aguanile, mai, mai. A bombón chele, a bombón chacha. Aguanile, bendíceme a la muchacha. Aguanile, aguanile, mai, mai. Aguanile, aguanile, mai, mai. Ay, aguanile, aguanile. Aguanile, dame agua, estoy seco y quiero beber. Aguanile, aguanile, mai, mai. Aguanile, aguanile, mai, mai. Ataca Romero. Aguanile, aguanile, mai, mai. Aguanile, aguanile, mai, mai. Aguanile, aguanile, mai, mai. Aguanile, aguanile, mai, mai.
Hello and welcome back. You're listening to WMH 89.3 FM Amherst College Radio, and we're going to do a quick PSA.
That was well said. Very
Thanks,
well
man.
said.
So Thursday, February 15th from 6 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. at the Holyoke High School Auditorium, the Palante Restorative Justice Program is hosting a movie night. They'll be playing Walkout, which is the true story of Mexican-American students in East Los Angeles who decided to stage a peaceful walkout to protest the injustices of the public school system. Set against the background of the Civil Rights Movement of 1968, it is a story of courage and the fight for justice and empowerment. And these movie nights are super cool. I went to one 2 weeks ago, I think, and they played a documentary about Puerto Rico, and I learned so much that our public school system is not teaching us, like forced sterilization programs in Puerto Rico, all this displacement for like military bases and operations. Yeah, there's just so much like really terrible, atrocious history and like modern day colonialism that just I had no idea about, or if I did, it was like vaguely there in my mind. But yeah, so this movie, it's about, this is my attempt to make a smooth segue, but this movie is about resistance at a youthful age growing up. And so we were wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about your own relation to the music that inspired your thesis as you were growing up too.
Yeah. So a lot of the music I grew up with was kind of basically curated by my dad, who both his parents were born in Puerto Rico. He had a very eclectic taste. So even within like the broad genre of Latin music, you know, he would play his favorite composer is Beethoven. He would play me a lot of, you know, classical music, but at the same time, we would also talk about, he would play a lot of salsa music that was both, you know, from Cuba, it would be from Puerto Rico, it would be from kind of New York salsa scene. And so a lot of the music I grew up with was like Willie Colon and Hector Lavoe, Fania All-Stars, Ruben Blades, it would be Celia Cruz, a lot of really socially, you know, propelled music. And, you know, I kind of took a hiatus from thinking about it when I first started coming to Amherst and started taking music classes. I didn't really think about the idea that I could ever kind of translate like these non-Western music forms into something like a department that does a really amazing job with Western music, but doesn't really focus as much on, besides on jazz, on other music forms. So in one of my classes, I had the opportunity to talk, we had to write a research paper about popular music of our choice. And I picked, Willie Colon and Hector Lavoe, Nuyorican salsa of the 70s, late 60s, 70s, and early 80s. And the portrayals of masculinity and violence and sexism. And actually had a lot of fun writing that paper. It was really like eye-opening. Their album covers would portray these scenes of violence, a man holding a gun to a head. And at a first glance, you think, they're serious. They're like these gangster portrayals. Mm-hmm. You open the album, and the guy who had the gun held to his head now is holding the gun at Willie Colon. They're humorous. It's a dark humor, but it's humorous. Nonetheless, the portrayals of masculinity and sexism were pretty, in a lot of, Latin cultures, it's unfortunately kind of something that has to be, worked on. There's a lot of room to grow, but I really liked kind of incorporating this idea of dance music. That's a big thing. And I thought about for my thesis, there's the same name for the dance and for the music style that is dance. That goes along with dance. So there's the bomba, there's the plena, there's the danza, even there's dancing and chant in West African music. And so that's something I thought a lot about when,
Great. That is very interesting, and I think shows how important studying music can be as a window into culture, as also a window into politics. And I think that's part of why we do this radio show, to get people like you to come in, share your experiences about this music. But I think it would be great, you touched a little bit on this already, about your experience studying music here at Amherst College in a department that specializes in Western and jazz, quote unquote Western music, however broad or narrow you want to describe or define that as. But tell us a little about your experiences. What are the difficulties? What are the triumphs and the joys?
Yeah, so I think one big misconception that people sometimes have about studying music is that it's really just playing an instrument or singing. So one of the things I was introduced to, it was more in the Western vein of things, and jazz as well. But I was introduced to theory and cultural studies and history. So I think the good thing that I got out of, studying music at the school was the foundation to build off of if I wanted to go into a different musical area of study. I will say I did have, the theory background, how to analyze music from different perspectives. It is, there's only one tenured woman in the department. There are no tenured people of color in the department. And actually, when I first proposed my thesis, there was kind of a little bit of, not pushback, but confusion, because people didn't really know when I said Puerto Rican intercultural identity in music, what that meant. A lot of people had no idea, especially people in the department had no idea what that even vaguely referred to. And so that actually pushed me more to talk about it, because I think it's really important that just because something isn't, traditionally studied in school, they're actually pushing now to do a Latinx and American music studies and Latin American music studies at Amherst.
Oh, wow.
It should be starting, I think, in the next year or so, which is fantastic. But I will say that the department, while it was more of naivete and ignorance, they just didn't know what it meant, but they didn't push against me. And ultimately, I think it was really important to, consider this music that is, not normally notated. It was really strange trying to write down rhythms that are completely improvised and, it's like a social scene. There's dance, there's, kind of a community. And it's really weird to have like a stage setting where I'm conducting and people are sitting there watching and not really participating. But I still think it was a much closer to the actual like Puerto Rican musical experience than, you know, I think a lot of people have seen before.
Yeah, but there was still some amount of, you felt you had to shape what you were trying to do for this.
I did. I definitely did.
Amherst College version of how you present music.
Yeah, I had to make a score. I had to, you know, use like Western notation, which is like, you know, little music notes on a staff versus there's other notation methods, but that's kind of the standard go-to that. So I kind of did have to fit it into this framework that was established by the department.
Yeah, that's frustrating. But yeah, again, as you said, I think you did a good job of like pushing those boundaries out. And I don't know how much the new program has to do with your thesis, but in my head, you seem like a trailblazer in this,
I really hope that, you know, it inspires people to kind of explore, like look outside the box, even if they're not doing a thesis necessarily, but, you know, studying music. I know there are a lot of musicians, really talented musicians on campus who kind of do like, you know, they play in a band, and it's kind of not really like, it's more of this informal thing. But I think having more of a coming together with the music department would be like so amazing ultimately.
I dig it. Is there any more, another song you want to play?
This is, so this song is Take 5, Tito Puente's interpretation of it. So Take 5 is by the Dave Brubeck Band. It's originally a jazz standard in 5. So it's not something you could dance to because it's in 5. That's the thing, like with a lot of Puerto Rican music and a lot of Latin music is it's in 4, so you can dance to it. That's the point, you know. So even if you don't dance to it, you know, there's that opportunity. So what Tito Puente did was he took this song that was in 5, reinterpreted it into 4. So it's this salsa Latin jazz song. So I actually listened to this growing up. My dad introduced me to this.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the jazz that I grew up with was Latin jazz. And not exclusively Puerto Rican, but this, you know, Tito Puente is, he's a Boricua. So.
Gotcha. It's funny though, yeah, I like the idea that they're like, take 5, and he's like, I'll do 4.
I'll do 4. And it'll sound distinct enough, at least like similar enough that you know exactly what it is. But a lot of people have not heard this version before, so I hope you guys like it.
I'm excited. Yeah, thank you.
Hello and welcome back. This is Uncultured. You've been listening to Uncultured.
True.
89.3 WAMH, Amherst College Radio. My name is Chimaway Lopez.
And I'm Rojas.
And we're joined by...
And I'm, I guess, the guest, Gabi Smith-Rosario.
Thank you so much for coming on our show, for sharing your musical insight and your studies and your knowledge about, Puerto Rican culture and the politics and the culture and the social issues that are going on around in it and that you express in your work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So up next, we have another show, still student programming. Do you want to talk a little about that, Gabby?
Yeah, so Kayla Brooks and Patrick Williams are going to do their show. If you guys haven't heard, coming up in the next few weekends, they're both presenting their theses in the music department. Patrick is doing a low horn thesis with one of his compositions is by Caleb, and Caleb is presenting kind of an operatic chamber performance of his thesis, and he's singing in it. So those should be amazing. You guys should definitely come check them out and tune into their show.
And a second PSA?
Oh, yeah, real quick.
This is Ian Petty.
Oh, this is Ian Petty,
Yes.
friend of the show. And Leah Penniman from Soulflower Farm is coming at 7:30 to Amherst College on Thursday. And Soulflower Farm is just a really cool spot, kind of looking at the intersection of food injustice and racism and gender inequality. And they do really cool stuff with like black land ownership and healthy food and cultural heritage through food. So should be a really cool talk, 7:30 Thursday at Amherst.
Thank you very much, Ian. This has been Uncultured. And
tuning in next week. Much love to the world. What's the last song we're going to listen to?
So the last song is kind of an unofficial Puerto Rican anthem. It is Preciosa by Rafael Hernandez, sung by the one and the only Mark Anthony.
Good night, folks.
Yo sé lo que son los encantos de mi Borinquen hermosa, por eso la quiero yo tanto, por siempre la llamaré preciosa. Yo sé de sus hembras trigueñas